this is not a typical historical kind of a presentation. It's a little bit unstructured. So those who are disciplined historians, you might be a little bit disappointed because it does meander a little bit, sometimes without rhyme or reason. But that's the way I do it. Commercial messages. Don't forget to come to Capex. Les, thanks for the plug for the show, and please do volunteer. David McLaughlin will be eternally grateful for everybody who does volunteer. That's going to be one heck of a show. And if you don't know, there's 411 exhibits that are registered that they're putting up. Back in 1793, when Simcoe landed in what is now Toronto, he established this little, almost a village of York, and you can just see on the map here. This is the Don River coming down here and emptying out into the bay. So it's not really a huge operation. Across here is the current Queen Street. So that was really the end of the world, and everything else after that was trees and shrubs. So it was a very small community, and the post office tended to be in this area because there are a number of small offices. So there's a little picture of Simcoe. He's only there because I found a real nice engraving, so he gets the place of honor. He has nothing to do with the postal history of the place at all. Significant dates. Well, 1793, Simcoe arrived at the harbor of Toronto. Named the place York, and the population was 241. As you can see, the majority was male, only 97 females. And in 1797, York became the capital of Upper Canada. They moved the capital from what is now Niagara-on-the-Lake to York, just to get it away from those nasty Americans. And in 1797, William Wilcox became the first postmaster in York. I think that might have been a bit of a hollow job because there really wasn't any postal service. But nonetheless, he got the job. In 1799, there was a postal service requested and established between York and Niagara-on-the-Lake. And then in 1800, service between Montreal and York was established. In 1801, Wilcox resigned. William Allen took over. Then in 1806, Donald McLean became postmaster. And in 1808, William Allen was reappointed postmaster. Now, in that time period, there wasn't really a whole lot happened. And if you happen to have any postal history from that period, it is going to be extremely valuable, very tough to get. But there's Wilcox, kind of a tough, grizzled old kind of a looking guy. And as I mentioned before, he was sort of in and out of the job fairly quickly. It looks like to me as if he probably wouldn't hold much of a job anyhow. There's the earliest cover that I've ever seen from 1798. It wasn't mine, it was Alan Steinhardt's. A letter to London, England. And as you can see here, it's prior to the establishment of the post office at York.
Yes.
And the letter's from a John White, who was the first man killed
Garfield
in a duel
Portch
in York. There's William Allen.
But it's current.
And we can hear you. Can you mute yourself?
Yeah, or maybe you've seen the presentation.
Sorry, there's William Allen. He held a whole lot of jobs in Toronto and passed through the postmaster's slot a couple of times. Okay. But he was a serious player in the founding of the Bank of Upper Canada, and he was the chairman of the Canada Company and very closely associated with the political elite who became what was known as the Family Compact. And their impact in the city really wasn't affected until into the 1830s. When they became a major factor. There's the earliest postmark of York, and this is not mine either. It belongs to Kim Salonen, who I'm sure everybody knows, and he won't sell it to me. However, he has rented the picture to me. So the hand stamp was in use in March of 1803. And that hand stamp remained in use through till about 1829. It was lasted a heck of a long time. And Kimmo and I have done some playing around on the VSC 6000 with all of his impressions. And whilst a lot of the impressions of that hand stamp are available, it appears they all do come from the same device. So just one device was ever put into service. So there's York's first post office, a little wood building, and it was on the east side of Frederick Street between King and Front. And that building ultimately was demolished. There's the earliest incoming letter that I've got, and that's 1823, and it was to our Receiver General at York, rated 10 pence sterling or 11 pence currency. And for those who aren't aware, Canada had a dual currency at the time. The sterling was the British sterling, and the currency was called Halifax currency, or ultimately Canadian currency, and it was slightly less valuable than the sterling ratings. So you will find that covers that are rated in Canada are rated with the Halifax currency, but the rate books show sterling, which creates a lot of confusion. James Scott Howard was York's fourth postmaster, and he was, as far as I'm concerned, a pretty serious player in the whole thing. He emigrated into Canada in 1819 and moved to York, where he worked in several functions, but assisted William Allen, who was the postmaster, but also worked in the customs office, and Allen was also the treasurer. So he became a valued employee, and William Allen saw that in July of 1828, Howard got the job as postmaster of York. And it's a job that he really took quite seriously. He stayed out of politics. He said that the job of the postmaster was too important to be involved in politics, and decided that he was just going to run a first-class operation. And it appears that, from all I've seen, that's exactly what he did. 1828, a new post office was built between Jarvis and George Street on the south side of Adelaide. So not far from where Toronto's first post office sits right now, if those are available or aware of the site. And there's a letter from York to Queenston. You can see the York hand stamp, and by now the date device has worn off. And that is in 1828, November the 3rd. I just got to get rid of this black toolbar that we have it gets in my way. Very interesting early mail into the Lieutenant Governor, Major General Sir John Colborne. This letter was posted in London, England on November the 11th of 1828. Colborne had just been appointed in August 1828, so it was a fairly new job. And again, you can see, you can see the rating in British sterling, because it was, of course, mailed in England. So you got the British 2 and 2, which converts to 2 and 5 Halifax currency, which is in here, and then rated for Halifax to Quebec City. So you can see all the math they've done to convert the rates, and totaling it up to 5 shillings and 7 pence currency to be paid here in York. That was a heck of a rate to charge for a single letter, just a huge amount. And what it was is a letter stating that £200 has been credited to his account so he can run the province of Upper Canada, and another £200 is to come. And not a whole lot of money to run a government. York's third post office was open from 1830 to 1833. And again, the west side of George Street, south of Adelaide. And that building too got demolished. Here is the first circular date stamp. And took a long time. I hadn't even seen one of these things until about a year and a half ago. After 30 years of looking, and I wasn't sure that they existed, but now I do know that they do exist. So there is the first circular date stamp that appeared in York of Upper Canada. Now this is a real interesting one. This is a piece that Kim O'Solonan found down in Kingston. Excuse me, and it's a combination of a first day and a last day strike. So there's his strike from March the 30th, 1830 of the hand stamp. And there's my York of July the 10th. And anyhow, we superimposed the darn things to prove that it exactly what it was. So we've got a first day of use of this one, and of this one, and the last day of the York double circle, and they're both struck on the same piece. So it's a absolutely remarkable piece. Again, it's the property of Kim O'Solonan. I think he's going to put it into an exhibit one of these days. This is the piece that was my discovery piece, is the earliest known strike of the hammer, but with that last one of Kim's, he kind of trumped this one. So it's just a nice example of an early use of the York hand stamp. And you'll notice that with the York ones, they're all hand stamped in red. Howard really liked the red stamp that they were using in Montreal, so he wrote a letter to the Postmaster General in Quebec City and said, that red is really nice. Can I use it in Toronto or in York? And he was given permission to use it. But everybody else in the postal system was using black for the date stamps. So Howard had the distinction, along with the city of Montreal, of using a red hand stamp. Makes them quite attractive. So by 1833, the population of York is now up to 9,000 people. The postmaster had to do more than just run the post office. He had to create the premises, hire the clerks, pay the clerks, purchase all the supplies, keep everything running. So in 1833, Howard went into negotiations with the Bank of Canada, and his old boss, William Allen, is now the president. And he bought a piece of property on Duke Street, immediately east of the bank, and put up this lovely structure that still stands today as Toronto's first post office, but in fact, it was York's fourth post office. This building was a combination of a residence for Howard and his family and a post office. So the post office entrance is this door here, and the post office is behind these windows for the entire depth of the building. And the residential entry was down here, and the family occupied the upper floors of the property. The post office itself includes not only a functioning post office, but a reading room, a fireplace, and chairs and writing supplies, and so on and so forth. And all that stuff was there because a lot of people traveled in from huge distances when they were going to church on Sundays, and picked up their mail and sat and composed responses rather than take another run downtown. And I say, and you'll notice that the office was open on Sunday mornings to accommodate the churchgoers. And there's the same structure today. It's still operating as a post office and an historical site. And if you haven't been there, it is very well worth the trip down. Even go mail your letters, and they'll even use a similar hand stamp to the York one or the 1834 Toronto hand stamp. Here's an example of free franking for postmasters. And again, it's the York hand stamp, but it's marked free up here. And Mr. Walsh was the postmaster in Victoria, which is down London way. And it was also the seat of the Upper Canada Treasury. So you'll see a fair bit of financial related mail addressed to various persons in Victoria. So on March the 6th, 1834, Toronto was incorporated as the City of Toronto, and York's fourth post office became Toronto's first, and Mr. Howard became our first postmaster. So in 1834, the population was up to 9,256 people, mailed between Toronto and Kingston twice a week. And this was all by carriage and horseback, and 22 stops along the way. But by 1837, that was improved to 6 days a week for the moving of the mail. Still very expensive to mail a single sheet letter, and the postage rate was predicated on the distance that a single sheet traveled. So you can see 4.5 pence for a single letter up to 60 miles. And 3.5 pence bought you a quart of milk, or 3 pence for a dozen eggs. So you can see the equivalent. It was really very expensive, relatively speaking, to mail letters. There's a very late use of the York Handstamp. We've already been incorporated as the City of Toronto, but the new City of Toronto Handstamps have not yet arrived, and they're still using the York Upper Canada Handstamp. And another letter to Mr. Walsh down in Victoria. Fortunately, he kept a lot of his stuff, so there's a great deal of postal history in the Walsh correspondence. There's an early example of a drop letter posted at Toronto on July the 4th, 1834, and it still has the York Handstamp. It's very faint in here, and it's the latest use that I've ever seen of the York Handstamp. Now we get into the City of Toronto with a big double ring hand stamp. The strikes of these are not strong, so when I show you the cover, you have to take my word that that illustration came from this cover up here. The impression is in red, as it's just carried on. The permission to use the red hand stamp transferred over to the City of Toronto, as it was given to Howard, not to the office. And another letter rated free to Victoria, to Queenston. Now we got another Toronto character, Mr. Egerton Ryerson, who seems to have fallen into disrespect right now, and they're renaming the university and doing all the other good things, rewriting history. I don't believe in rewriting history. But Ryerson did a lot of pretty neat stuff in the City of Toronto, and he's the guy that established the school system, and he was a very strong ally of William Lyon Mackenzie, who was Toronto's first mayor, and he was pushing for political reform, and he was the superintendent of education in Upper Canada in 1844. And there's a whole pile of his correspondence goes to Eldon House down in London. So when you see the London Eldon House addressees, that's his niece. And Sid Mensinger, the president of the West Toronto, has quite a collection of Ryerson's correspondence going to his niece as an Eldon House collection. Very interesting side spin. There's an interesting letter to Ryerson. I like this one. It's a letter from England, but addressed to the City of Toronto and Upper Canada, and to Ryerson as the editor of the Christian Herald. And I love to use the cross and the TIAN as Christian. I just thought that was kind of interesting, but that's I guess that's how they did it in those days, and a myriad of lovely English markings. 1835, Howard, because the post office again was expanding, moved his family out of the post office, and they moved up to Yonge and St. Clair neck of the woods, not too far from where the Green Foundation sits today, and used the rest of the space in the facility for postal operations. The post office staff was now up to 6. This is where things start to get a little interesting and politics starts to play in the game. Howard was offered the position of the post office surveyor of Upper Canada, The surveyor was really that's a fancy name for supervisor of postal operations. And Howard declined. He said he much preferred to be the postmaster of Toronto. So the job was given to Charles Albert Berczy, who was the postmaster at Amherstburg. And that appointment was made by Sir Charles Bondhead, who was now the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, and a very staunch fan of the family compact and the Trump type conservatives of the day. Now, there's an 1836 letter from Toronto going to London, England, and of course you can see it's a ship letter. But in here, there you can see a lovely little marking called "Too Late." This is the beginning of the cover your backside thing. The mailbag had already been sealed when that letter was submitted to the post office, but it was still dated as received on May the 27th, but marked "too late for the mail." So if the letter was delayed, it wasn't the postmaster's fault. There were heavy penalties applied to the postmaster if mail was late being delivered. And you can see that it's rated, because it was going to England out of New York, it's rated 3-in-1 currency, which got the letter from Toronto to Niagara-on-the-Lake and across to New York, and then $1.25 U.S. postage from the Niagara region to New York City, and then 6 1/8 sterling collected the other end. Again, a enormously expensive postage. The reason it was that expensive, by the way, is that, and I had to get Bill Longley's help on this one. This 1 1/4 up here indicates that it's a 5 times rate. A 1/4 ounce was the basis weight. So everything here is quintupled. So this got it out of the country. But at the other end, there was a rate of 40p in Great Britain as a tax for letters going into Liverpool, and a 40p per sheet rate from Liverpool to London. So that created the 6 1/8 on the other side that the British Post Office collected. So again, we have rating in 3 different currencies. We've got the Upper Canada or Halifax currency, US dollars, and British sterling. And there's a full explanation of the rates. I forgot that I had this slide in here. So again, 7 pence for the distance in Canada, times 5 is 35 pence. 2 pence ferriage across the Niagara River is 37 pence, or 3-in-1. 25 cents is the rate in New York, times 5. So there's your $1.25. And then the 40 pence and the 40 pence, 6 1/8. And it was 38 days in transit. Enter now William Lyon Mackenzie, who became our first mayor. Now, he was not elected as mayor. He was elected to city council, and then within the city council, they elected the mayor. So he was the internal appointment. He fought like the devil against the family compact, and he despised Lieutenant Governor Bondhead. And Bondhead, by the way, didn't get the job quite legitimately. He was supposed to go to his brother, but apparently the appointment letter had the wrong name on it, so he got the job instead of his brother. Incompetence right from the get-go. But there's Bondhead. And again, he's the guy that appointed Berczy as the post office surveyor. Now, at this time, we've got the Mackenzie with his little band of rebels, and Mackenzie was being a rabble rouser against the family compact, and they were playing the game with taxes. a bunch of the supporters of the family compact raided Mackenzie's print shop. They took all the print and took it down and dumped it in the harbor. So it was kind of a noisy battle. And Mackenzie, of course, started to put together his little band of rebels who were going to have a revolution in Toronto. So in 1837, we got the rebellion against the compact. The compact was led by Archbishop Strawn, supported by Bond Head, and the bank. Berczy, now in his role of working for Bond Head, became a spy in the post office. And what they were looking for was seditious mail going through the system. Berczy, contrary to regulations, opened the mail. They weren't supposed to do that, but hey, he was a spy, and I guess spies in those days could do whatever they jolly well felt like doing. And Berczy accused Howard as being part of the rebellion because, as postmaster, he was facilitating the movement of mail between the rebels. Anyhow, the rebellion went off in December of 1837. And as a result of that rebellion, Howard got dismissed as the postmaster. And lo and behold, Berczy gets the job, which is the job that he coveted. So there's politics playing a big role. Howard set about with a lawsuit to prove that he was quite innocent. And there is a very interesting document at Toronto's first post office that has all of his correspondence that he wrote to the postmaster, stating that it was not his problem that people were illicitly using the mail. He was still fulfilling his function as an apolitical postmaster, and it stayed right out of it. But to no avail, he was fired, and life went on. So there was your family compact, or certainly the key players. So they've got Robinson, who was the sort of the top legal guy in the assembly. Bishop Strawn, who ran the church. Osgood, who ran the law society. So if you've got all those guys in your pocket, you've got a pretty strong side in a rebellion. This is a letter that I found not too long ago. I always wondered what happened to Mackenzie and the guys after the rebellion was over, because only two of the 800 rebels got captured, and incidentally, both of them were hanged. But I bought this little letter for the wrong reason. I bought it because it was written by a member of Parliament, and he was sending the letter back to the editor of the Bytown Gazette. And I didn't realize at the time how important the darn thing was. Sometimes we hold these single folded letters and we're afraid to open them. Well, by golly, I sat down one Saturday night with a glass of scotch, and I opened the letter and read, and lo and behold, it says that Mackenzie is busy down in Navy Island in the Niagara River. And apparently he's taken his 800 rebels down to the Niagara River, declared Navy Island as the Republic of Canada, and he is now the president. And that he's fallen in with a General Van Rensselaer, whose father was also a general in the American forces, and he was at Queenston Heights when Brock was killed. So the Rensselaer, still being a devout American and anti-British, allied with Mackenzie and supplied him with provisions, food, and a boat to go up and down the Niagara River, mooching more supplies to provision this little group of about 800 guys. They made the mistake of raiding one of the U.S. arsenals and liberating some guns, which probably wasn't a good idea. propped them up on Navy Island, ostensibly to repel the Brits when they came. And in testing the guns, they lobbed some shots into an American Army base, which apparently did not go over at all well. And Mackenzie and Van Rensselaer were arrested and charged with the breach of the Neutrality Act, and they were put in jail in Buffalo. Where ultimately they were released and get on with life. But ultimately the British forces came and they scattered the rebels off Navy Island, and that was the end of the rebellion. But it's also in the letter, this chap talks about Bond Head and his incompetence with the handling of the rebellion, and that he was going to be fired, and that he was going to be replaced with Sir George Arthur. And up until this letter, I'd never heard of Sir George Arthur, but he was our second lieutenant governor in Upper Canada. It turns out that George Arthur was, in his previous job, the governor of the Tasmania and the penal colony. And his claim to fame down there was that he perfected the gallows that allowed him to hang people two at a time. Nobody had ever died in the penal colony down there except from natural causes. But under his tutelage, some 600 died in the 3 months prior to his vacating the premises. So he became our new lieutenant governor, and totally politically incorrect. And I guess that's why he's not in the history books, because the first thing that he did when he got into the job in Canada was he executed the two that were arrested in connection with the rebellion. So he just carried on with his good work. Now, with Howard being fired, they had an interesting situation. Howard owned the post office. So when he got fired, he said, well, you got to find a new post office. You can't be in my building anymore. So Berczy had to relocate, and he built quite a nice looking office down at the corner of Yonge and Front Street. And I've got a picture of it a little bit further on here. A very nice office. There is really about the latest use I've ever seen of the red hand stamp, because when Howard got fired, of course, the permission to use the red hand stamp terminated. So now we got Berczy as the postmaster. There he is, and in his report in the report of the Postmaster General, W.H. Griffin, who was the Postmaster General at the time, talked about his postmaster, saying he never distinguished himself. He was really a nobody, but he continued as the postmaster. He ran a series of 13 agents who were reporting to the lieutenant governor's office. He became a director of the Bank of Upper Canada. He was the president of the Consumers Gas, Light and Water Company. And I say he was just didn't really do a whole bunch. Or not for us anyhow. But there was the post office he created, and it's quite a lovely building, and down at the corner of Front Street, just west of Yonge Street. Suffice to say, long since replaced. So in the 1840s, Toronto's population is now up to 21,000. Got 3 clerks on duty, 1 letter carrier now in the business. Prepaid letters had the rates marked in red, and unpaid letters were marked in black. And that became a general regulation throughout the country. And you'll see now we're still using the same hand stamp, but now it is black because the permission to use the red was not extended to Berczy at all. Fair bit of correspondence goes out to Mr. John Cartwright down in Kingston, and he was a member of Parliament, and so he also kept a huge pile of mail. And you'll see here it's marked too late. They were very careful in flagging this stuff because the postmasters did not want to get blamed for delaying the mail. Here's another interesting example of how the mail was handled. Because they were still charging postage for distance traveled. A letter was mailed in Queenston or Niagara-on-the-Lake, and here it's put on board a ship, a steamboat, and there's the steamboat marking, and you can see a better example of it here. There was no postmaster on the steamboat. There was just a box to receive the mail, so people could not prepay the postage. So everything was sent collect, and when the ship arrived in Toronto Harbor, it was taken straight to the post office, marked with a Toronto receiver, and marked 4.5 pence unpaid. And it's interesting that because from Queenston to Toronto, across the lake is less than 60 miles, the 4.5 pence rate applied. If it went by carriage around the end of the lake, it would be about 75 miles, and the rate would have been 7 pence. So it was to the advantage of the people to get their stuff on the steamboat. The Cross Lake steamer ran on a daily basis, so it was a pretty good and very regular service. There's the beginning of money letters in my collection, and you'll see that and this is the forerunner, by the way, of registered mail. They had no qualms about marking a letter cash, and they mention inside that it did have a check. So cash or a check didn't really matter which, and that was charged as an extra sheet of paper. So the rate was doubled for the enclosure. And again, too late with a new hand stamp now, because this one's in the italic. The other was block caps. Here's another form of the late markings that they used, and this is a letter that was going from Toronto to Guelph, and it was going by rail. Posted on December the 18th. It was marked, it was too late. It didn't make the train. Checked the railway schedule. The train went to Guelph twice a week, so it was held from the 18th to the 22nd. So it's redated, and on it went with again 7 pence due. So the rate is right through the date. A fascinating letter that gave me more information on the Mackenzie thing. Now, this is a broadsheet that the young gentleman was writing back to his father in England. And the letter, as you can see, originated at toll gate number 5, which was on Bloor Street near Bathurst. And it is 4 pages of heavily concentrated writing. And I think it was probably written over about a 6 or 7 week period. Just every now and then, the kid sat down and penciled a few notes to his dad, who had obviously been in Toronto, because he was giving news on a whole lot of the old neighbors and people that he would have known. And right smack dab in the middle of page 3 is this line: Mackenzie has got liberated from jail and got his liberation, but like with a pardon from the States, and is running at large. So Mackenzie's back in business. I just thought that was a kind of a very fine note to let me know that when he got out of jail. So sometime slightly before May the 6th of 1840. Another letter to England. I think, again, these things don't necessarily scan as well as they should, but April the 12th, 1842, Toronto to Kingston, from the Canada Company. The Canada Company was an operation in Toronto that was charged with the responsibility of getting immigrants from Great Britain to come to Huron County. And they had a huge land gathering operation and controlled almost all the real estate in Huron County and made it available for settlers. Here we have mail that is cross-border, so it's paid to the lines, again in currency, and then carried across to Queenston, where it's got U.S. currency on it. And you can see that you can't see that it's got a very light Lewiston hand stamp. So it's been, again, like that previous letter, towed it across from Queenston across the Niagara River into Lewiston for onward transmission in the USA for the price of 25 cents to Hartford, Connecticut. There is mail that gets redirected into Toronto, and it's just addressed to York Mills, Yonge Street. So it ended up in the downtown Toronto post office, and they forwarded it. And you'll notice on here they've got it's a 2.5 pence more to pay, and that's the forwarding fee. In 1844, the rates got changed. Working rates on the number of sheets became a bit of a problem, so they started working on the basis of rates. So a ½ ounce became your standard single rate. Up to an ounce, they charged 2 rates, but they didn't charge for 1.5. They went straight from 1 to 2 for 4 rates, and 2 to 3, 6 rates. So your postage rates could pile up very quickly. If you were slightly over the ounce, you might as well double your contents. So there's the third Toronto post office after that one up front and Yonge ceased to operate, and that's on Wellington near Leader Lane, and that building is still there in a little cul-de-sac just on the south side of King Street. And just a very standard letter, 4.5 pence, covering the rate from Toronto to Queenston by water, and then to Drummondville, so Niagara Falls. The total distance is still less than 60 miles. So it's a single rate, still marked too late. You know, they love that kind of a rate system. Cover your butt. Now you got a money letter, and instead of marking it cash, they just mark it money, and a rate of 11.5 pence for a ½ ounce traveling more than 300 miles. And the content here was a mortgage payment of £17 and 19 shillings, and I presume that was in the form of a check or a draft. And again, this guy Smith was a lawyer in Montreal. Whole pile of mail went to him. I don't think he ever threw his letters out either. Now we have the introduction of a new hand stamp. There's nothing spectacular about this letter, except that now we're using a Toronto.Canada with a two ring hand stamp. Beyond that, nothing spectacular. Lots of examples of this thing in existence, but here it is in combination with a hand stamp for the 3 pence. It was around the early 1850s that they started using hand stamps with the postage in them rather than writing them. There was just so much mail going through the city of Toronto, it was easier to do that than do the manuscript markings. Then they even went further, and instead of using 2 stamps to mark paid and the rate, they combined those 2 together. But they also had a date hand stamp that also had paid included in the base of the stamp. Here we are in 1852, and we can see that the post office is really growing. There's a list of all the employees. So we got 7 clerks, a postmaster, a letter carrier, and a temporary clerk. And you see that the salary for the temporary clerk was £25 a year. A postmaster was getting £400 a year. So that was a pretty healthy salary in 1852. So the post office ran for £1,006 and 11 pence for the year. Berczy's period came to an end when he committed suicide. At the time of his death, he was, say, the Bank of Upper Canada president, director, Toronto Building Society president, the Huron Union Railroad Company, Consumers Gas. He was in the gas, light, and water business, which was a company that failed. He was dismissed as postmaster in 53 and died in 58. And as say Griffith wrote in his report, never really amounted to much.
Garfield, I have a question. Is there has any research been done about why he committed suicide? Was he in debt? Was he embezzling? Was he just depressed?
He was depressed, Robert. Apparently, he turned into a real nutcase.
Okay.
He just completely degenerated into a
poor guy. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was just wondering. It's because it's not very common you see public figures committing suicide. So,
well, and my take on it is that the guy had so many things going, and he's involved in so many dirty dealings and failing companies that I just think that he had trouble being successful at too much.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Do you know if the park behind the Flatiron building is that named after him?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he got a park.
Yeah, it's the Berczy family. His dad was also a pretty prominent guy too. So the Berczy family was very well connected in the city of Toronto and throughout Upper Canada for really the first half of the century. So yeah, he got his park.
Up in Aurora here, next to the GO station is Berczy Street.
Yeah, I think there's a Berczy Street in Toronto as well. I know that his father also had some dealings outside of Toronto and north of the city, the Markham area, but just exactly what that connection is, I don't know. I must admit that I haven't researched it yet. That's sort of on the to-do list. So here's the fourth post office, and that building is still there today. It's an absolutely gorgeous structure on Toronto Street, and that was the head office of Argus Corporation, and now it's a financial management company. And I guarantee you can't get in through the front doors without an appointment. But it's a lovely building to go down and look at, and it sits there in all of its glory. Joseph Leslie became the postmaster at that time, and I think Leslie was probably one of the best postmasters that we've ever seen. His father was a postmaster in Dundas, and Joseph Leslie got the job through a political appointment, as most of them did in the day. But he also did a very fine job. During his term of office, railway mail service was introduced. Street mailboxes added. Canada switched to decimal currency. That wasn't his doing. He had nothing to do with that at all. They decided they would give letter carriers cash for public transit fares. Now letter carriers just to ride on the TTC free of charge. But they were able to get around on public transit. And also in his period of time, free mail delivery was inaugurated in 11 cities in Canada, including Toronto. So those were all kind of major developments. There is nothing that will particularly show up in the postal history here. So all we're going to see is the introduction of new types of hand stamps. And so there was nothing terribly exciting about the way mail got handled. So there's the double split ring with the PAID at the bottom of it, and the PAID threepence. And strangely enough, this is after the introduction of postage stamps, because postage stamps came in April of 1851. So they're still marking. Because the use of postage stamps was not mandatory until 1875. But we're still in pounds, shillings, and pence. Here's another 3 pence without the PAID, and the Toronto Canada without any markings below it. Now we switch to Toronto Upper Canada and the fancy threes. And these are very attractive hand stamps when you see them. There was a whole range of them for a lot of the rates, but the 3, 6, and 7 were the most popular of the rates that were used on those stamps. 1851 postage stamps were introduced, and this is my earliest one on cover. And of course, it's the 3-penny beaver, and canceled using a 7-ring obliterator. And as the regulations required, the date stamp was not to be used to cancel the stamp, but should be placed on the envelope away from the stamp in case the stamp fell off the envelope, so they would still be able to track the date and blame the postmaster if it was late. Now we have another very large and almost attractive hand stamp. The interesting thing is that this one doesn't have a year in it. So the only way you can ever determine the year or confirm the year is by the receiving mark on the back or by contents. And this hand stamp was used through to 1857. The example I have here is the earliest known use of the hand stamp. Again, another iteration of the Toronto PAID, and now they've really spelling out the PAID, and you just can't miss it. 1856 in October, a huge development in the post office in Canada, and that is the completion of the railway between Toronto and Montreal. So we've now got a straight run through. All these other little railways were in operation, but they're all quite short run railways. And for those who make the study of railway post offices, this region here is just absolutely rich for study. I think Michael Miller was the only person I knew that ever really attacked this and understood it. But it's fascinating to read the history and the development of these little post offices, these little railways, which were all charged with carrying mail, and they're all under contract to the government. But the big one, I say, was the completion of this run. So the mail started moving in by rail in October of 1856. There is the only photograph that exists or is known to exist of the railway station in Toronto. That is the first Union station in 1858, and it was just a little bit east of the present Union station. And your basic train in those days consists of the locomotive, the tender that carried the coal, the mail car, and one car for passengers, and that was it. In 1858, they started using split ring hand stamps. And this was a study that just drove me nuts. But you'll notice that there's essentially 4 different hand stamps. There's the Toronto Upper Canada, Toronto Canada West, Toronto Ontario without the period, and Toronto Ontario with the period. I have since discovered that 39 different iterations of these the two Toronto aunts. And it stands to reason because there were a number of clerks in the post office, and each would have his own hand stamp. We're crazy to think that they shared one stamp amongst all the clerks. So there are differences. And if you decide to play the game, I suggest that you be armed with a good ruler, because the way you distinguish these things is the length of the arcs. And as you can see right here, even this one's even connected to the T, but they range anywhere from about 4 millimeters up to 9.5 millimeters and you measure them from tip to tip, not on the circumference. But I say I've identified 39 of them, and I said, what the hell with it? It's not worth the exercise. So just lump them all together as split ring hand stamps. But if you'd like to do a detailed study, it's free ground. There's lots of area to study. 1858, Toronto was now the seat of government of Upper Canada. And here's free franking from the Receiver General. And of course, it must be endorsed by the office. So you will see the endorsement in the lower left corner of anything that's going as free mail. And this is the earliest recorded use of this particular split ring hand stamp. In 1859, we've got letter boxes being installed, and this is a letter that was written to the mayor saying, hey, we're putting mailboxes in at all these places for the convenience of the population of Toronto. So there were a total of 12 mailboxes installed, and as you can see, they're kind of liberally spread around downtown, which of course meant they had to get someone to travel around to empty the mailboxes. So that was a contract that was put out by the city. And it was actually picked up by a gentleman who ran the office that became the Bathurst Street Post Office ultimately, or the Toronto West Post Office. And so he dragged around a couple times a day to pick up all the mail and take it into the Toronto Street Post Office. Again, just a use of a Toronto Canada West PAID Handstamp. And now that you can see they're using PAID, and the rate is up to 5 cents instead of 3 pence, because in 1859 we went to decimal currency. The post office in 1862 had 1 postmaster, 1 assistant, 9 clerks on incoming mail, 7 clerks on delivery side, 2 letterbox collectors, 6 mail carriers, 1 messenger, and 1 guy who was under contract to carry the mail to the railway station. And interesting enough, checking the salaries and the contracts, the postmaster at the time was being paid $2,000 a year, and the guy carrying the mail to the railway station was paid $1,760 because he had to feed the horses. Here's one that's particularly now states 1 cent as just having the number 1, and it's a drop letter rate. Very nice, clean cover. I just happen to like it, and this is part of my crazy study when I thought I was going to do all these hand stamps, but I kept this one for the auxiliary marking, the rate marking. Here's the introduction of what I think is one of the prettiest cancels that Toronto's ever had. It's just a diamond grid, and when it was struck evenly, I think it just made a very attractive strike, and they're not scarce by any stretch of the imagination. But prior to 1863, they're tough to find. I have seen as early as 1859. I don't have one back to that date yet. I will get one sooner or later. Okay, now here's the PAID in conjunction with a 10 cent, which is a double weight letter. This is a real tough one to find. If you're out scrounging for it, you're going to have a very rough time. For this obliterator, they had 3 pins, and the whole idea of the pins was to stop people from soaking the stamps, cleaning them off, and reusing them. They called it a scarifier, and it's very similar in its operation to the grills on the U.S. stamps. Although the grills on the U.S. stamps were applied before the postal marking, and it just that the ink kind of seeped into the holes and seeped through. Here, the ink was applied at the same time as the hand stamp. The problem was that the pins wore out very quickly. So all that you see when you nowadays, if the strike is more than about a month old, you just see 3 dots. you don't see any perforations, you don't see any holes. But there they are, and that's the only one that I have ever seen. They are, I'm sure they're not that scarce, but I just think they're that tough to find because we just don't recognize them for what they are. 1868. Here's the addition of time markings on the in the hand stamp. Started off with the AM and PM, and ultimately carried on through, and in several cases put in the hour. But the AM and PM was quite popular, and Toronto was one of the first offices to use that service. Toronto also introduced the fancy 2 cancellations. These are all corks or improvised hand stamps. And up until about 3 years ago, it was agreed that there was perhaps 3 or 4 of them. But Dr. Alec Globe, who I think a lot of people here have met and understand, took it upon himself to research the Toronto 2s. And I think at the last count, he had identified 32 or 33 Toronto 2 hand stamps. And he has a gold medal collection of these things. And these are from the title page of his exhibit. It's stunning stuff. And if you ever get a chance to see it, certainly do take a good look at it. It is so worth seeing. And I think Alec now has all of the Toronto 2s, and I can't find one for my collection. The improvised corks were used extensively in the 70s, primarily because the post office were unable to get the brass canceling devices rapidly enough from the supplier, Pritchard and Andrews. So the postmasters were charged with making their own. And again, if people like these fancy hand stamps, I very highly recommend that you consider joining the BNAP's Fancy Cancel study group, and or get the book written by David Lascelles on fancy cancels. They're really quite attractive, and a very worthwhile collection if you want to chase them. And here's another new date stamp, and again we've got no year marked on this one. So the only way I was able to determine that it was 1874 is because there was a receipt in the envelope dated 1874. So that was pretty much living proof of what it was. And of course, just to make sure that it wasn't a subbed-in thing, the receipt is written to the addressee. So it does, that's as good as a tie, I think. Post office outgrew the facility at the foot of Toronto Street and built a brand new one on Adelaide Street at the head of Toronto Street. And this was just an absolutely magnificently beautiful building. And it's become the subject of many, many postcards, such as these. Unfortunately, the building got torn down a few years ago, and it was turned into a government building. And this little thing, it does not show up on every postcard, but that's a public washroom. I only mention that for the record because when I showed this thing the first time, there was a Toronto historian in the crowd, and he called me out for not pointing out the lavatory. So there you are, folks. There is a public lavatory. I don't think there are too many of them on the streets of Toronto. Now the homeless people just pee in this corner over here. 1879, Joseph Leslie was retired as the postmaster of Toronto. The Globe and Mail called it a crime, but Thomas Pattison became the postmaster for the rest of my study period through to 1907. Pattison was an interesting guy, and you'll notice in the second line here, he was a good friend of John A. Macdonald. And if you're looking for a government job, it really helps to be a good friend of the Prime Minister. I'm sure that still holds today. He and MacDonald were both brought up in Kingston, and he worked with MacDonald. He was a great supporter and did a lot of backroom work. He was also kind of a poor businessman, and he bankrupted the Mail, which is a local newspaper. They sold the remnants to the Globe, and of course now we still have the Globe and Mail today. But he lost everything that he had in that bankruptcy. However, his good friend, Sir John A., came to his rescue and said, "How would you like to be the postmaster of Toronto? We can retire Leslie and give you the job, and you're good to go for the rest of your life." So Leslie got retired with a pension of $2,500 a year, which was a substantial sum. And then the Globe editorial says it's disgraceful that we should be put to this expense just so that MacDonald's friend can have a job. But Leslie Pattison turned out to be a good postmaster. He did good, strong work. The city was growing in leaps and bounds. We're now up to 86,400 people. And in the next 10 years, increased by almost another 100,000. He contracted Follis Johnson to collect the mail from now 70 street mailboxes. They incorporated Downsview, Elia, Norway, Doncaster, Deer Park, and others as new extensions to the Postal Service. Under his tutelage, Toronto annexed Parkdale, Brockton, Yorkdale, Davisville, Riverside. So it suddenly made the post office a pretty big operation. We're no longer this little village community thing. And he also got the regulation and put in that every letter in Toronto should have the name and street number, no matter how well known the person might be. So none of this, Robert P. Toronto. They actually had to give your address. And I forgot what, I won't give you the address, Robert. Here's another example of registered mail. And this is kind of fascinating because it is registered, but it's also got the cork, and it's got a special registered hand stamp as well. So it's got a few nice things going in, and a study of registered mail is a very interesting study unto itself. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it can be a great deal of fun and a great deal of work. Also, during Pattison's time, we've got the introduction of the duplex postmarks. There's just so much mail going through that to strike them twice, once to obliterate the stamp and once to put the date on, combine the two devices and put them together. So there's a number of different Toronto type markings. You got the depots with the letter in them, or the Toronto number 1, which was the Toronto. Under the expansion, Spadina was 2, and Yorkville was 4, I believe. Riverside branch was 5. So it did identify them, but it was a great process for reducing the number of strikes by 50%. There's also the introduction of another experimental postmark with a dotted inner ring. And if you can find these things, boy, they are really tough. There was an article written by someone in the Postal History Society that said there's maybe 5 copies known. I now know of 18 examples of the Toronto hand stamp. And those 18 are held by Kimmo and myself. But they are just disastrously scarce.
And so are they only? It seems there that it's only 1 year. I mean, they really were. It was a short period and really experimental.
Yeah, there's your July 30th to November 23rd of 1886.
Isn't that amazing?
And after that, they don't exist anymore. Huh, now, the interesting thing is that most of the surviving ones are on postcards. And I think these dots were intended to be tiny perforators, again, to stop the removal of the cancellation. So in most of the postcards I've got, there are tiny depressions there, but whether that was the purpose or not, I haven't been able to prove it conclusively. We also had the orb postmarks, which are the big circular ones, and they're really quite pretty. Commonly, you'll find in the books there's the 2-ring and the 3-ring, but there are various. There's 2 different versions of the 2-ring, and probably 3 or 4 of the 3-ring. Differences aren't substantial, but if you want to specialize, they are, and they're very pretty. They're handsome stamps to have. The thing that I find fascinating here is that, contrary to regulation, the post office has now switched to using the date stamp as an obliterator as well, rather than having it off to the side as per regulation. We've also got the introduction of the squared circle postmarks. Early in 1892, they started off with what they call the precursors that were used in about 15 cities around the country. And again, very attractive hand stamps. And then they switched to the type that we commonly recognize today as the squared circle. And those 2 are both subjects of a complete book written by Handstamps and available through Handstamps. Very worthwhile to have if you're going to study the squared circles. There's also a huge study of the machine cancellations, which started in Montreal with the imperial marking machines. The Imperial Machine Company lost the contract to the Bickerdike, which was a Canadian company, by the way, in 1897. And Bickerdike machines were installed in Toronto and Hamilton and Ottawa, and ultimately in Montreal. And were a greatly successful in processing huge volumes of mail. They could pump this stuff through, at the rate that was 5 times what a clerk could do. And of course, probably the date and an obliterator and a fresh impression every time, because every letter that went through, the device was re-inked. So they're all crisp and clean. There's also a story that comes in here of the Union Station. This is the photograph I showed earlier. But I call Union Station the post office that didn't exist. I found in my research a contract between the post office and the Grand Trunk Railway. And down here in paragraph 7, it says a convenient room is to be provided at the Montreal and Toronto stations for the accommodation of an officer of the post office to be stationed at each of these points. Now, that wasn't what got me started on this, but what got me started was I found this cover with a Union Station hand stamp. And I had just done an exhibit on the expansion of the post office in Toronto, and I thought I had them all, and I got a gold medal for the exhibit. And then I found this one. I said, whoops, that wasn't in the exhibit. But the fascinating thing is there wasn't a post office in Union Station till 1829. So why have we got the hand stamps? And that becomes a very interesting study. But it appears that there was never a post office on the platform or at the station, but there was a carrier, and that I've mentioned the guy earlier, who for $1,700 and some odd a year carried the mail to the railway station as often as required. And if any mail had been left on the platform, it was just sent back up to the post office for processing. But somewhere along the line, I think they said, hey, why not just let the guy on the platform cancel the mail and throw it back on the train if it's going out of town. In about 6 years of looking, I have now located a total of 24 examples of the Union Station postal markings. They are really scarce. There's got to be more of them, but where they are, I have no idea. There's another Union station. They had, now you'll notice they've got a duplex and a honkin' big hand stamp. If it was just a little wee tiny operation with 1 or 2 pieces of mail a day, why did they have 2 different hand stamps? They haven't been able to figure that one out yet either. And there's there's the example of the duplex. So they do exist. Where it's going from here, I don't know. I'm still looking for the things and trying to write the whole story. But Patterson's big story in 1881 was the establishment of branch offices. Things are just getting too big for the city to handle. There was where the main post office was in the city. But now we're, and this is Adelaide Street, and this is Yonge. The city's now extending well up beyond Bloor Street. It's extending well beyond Bathurst Street, and it's gone to the other side of the Don River. It's just too much for this office. So they opened up the office at Toronto West at the corner of Queen and Bathurst, the Toronto North at Carlton and Yonge. Carlton Street was considered to be north in those days, and Toronto East at Queen and Parliament. And those 3 offices handled a lot of local mail. They were responsible for clearing the local mailboxes and forwarding mail onward. They acted as a full post office, but anything that was registered or leaving the country had to be sent through the Toronto Post Office to be sent onto the trains. So it's just an interesting process. And I'm just going to go quickly through the offices because it's really another story for another day. But there's your Toronto West, a lovely intaglio W in the duplex cancellation. Toronto East, and by East also had an intaglio E, and Toronto West had the same type of a duplex. There's the Toronto North at the corner of Yonge and Carlton. So the offices were popping up, and in 1885 to 1897, they subdivided again, and that is another whole story, which takes as much time as this part of the story. They were generally within drugstores and grocery stores, and they were named after the street. And I'll tell you that story if I get invited back to do part 2. If I don't get invited back, you'll have to catch it somewhere else. Questions that are still hanging around. You'll see a lot of postal markings from the inquiry office. They all seem to be on newspaper receipts. If anybody can tell me what the inquiry office was, I will be grateful. I am guessing that it was a back office on that lovely post office on Adelaide Street that handled bulk mail and newspapers. I can't prove it, but the hand stamps are all purple and they're rubber stamps as opposed to a steel stamp or any kind of a metal stamp. But they're kind of interesting, and I'd just like to find out how the mail was processed there and why it wasn't processed through the front door in the usual channels.
Garfield, when I was collecting Montreal advertising covers, I remember coming across Montreal covers with a similar cancel. So I'll double check that, but a similar size and shape. So anyway,
yeah, it's a fascinating study, and there's always going to be questions. I think that every time you discover something, it creates more questions than there are answers. So that takes us up to the end of the 1880 period and into the expansion period, which I say is another story altogether. And it's a lot of fun, and it's a developing story.